I think that's the first thing you come to terms with is that most of your photographer people that you knew, they aren't really going to remember you for your photography. Instead, what they're going to remember you for are all the wonderful conversations and all the memories they have of you hiking with them and the human connection. I think the thing that I'd like to be remembered for would be not my photography, but how I was as a human while we were out there in the field.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 425 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen. I'm your host, Matt Payne, and today's conversation is truly unique. My guest, Mark Handy, was first on the podcast back in episode 44, 7 years ago. Back then, he was living the dream of many landscape photographers, selling high-end prints, running his own gallery, and traveling the world in pursuit of incredible images. But today, Mark's story has taken a completely different turn. He made the life-changing decision to step away from photography altogether, shifting his focus to family, a different way of life, and ultimately redefining success on his own terms. In this episode, we unpack why he walked away, what he misses and what he doesn't miss, and what life looks like now compared to his years as a full-time photographer. Mark also opens up about some of the harder realities of the photography business, including how his gallery director embezzled from him, the impact of his career on his family, and what he would do differently if he could go back. His story offers a rare and honest perspective on what it truly takes to build a career in landscape photography and what it can cost. This is a conversation about passion, sacrifice, and finding fulfillment beyond the camera. Let's dive in. Here's my conversation with Mark Handy. All right, Mark Handy, welcome back to the podcast.
Matt, good to see you. It's been a long time, pal.
Yeah, man, you were a guest way back on episode 44 in 2018, which was 7 years ago.
I think it was right around this time also. I think it was in February of 18.
It was, indeed.
Oh, that's crazy.
It is
And here
crazy.
we are, February the 18th, 2025.
I know.
We're both 7 years older.
And you look great.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. You said you're like working out every day and running. And
Yeah, you know what it is? You can look thinner, but if you're not putting on muscle at the same time, all you're really doing is just harvesting fat. As you come down in weight, and remember at the time of my last podcast with you, I weighed about 185 pounds. So let's say I've come down 25 pounds, but let's say I didn't put any muscle on. All that means is that I lost some fat, obviously, but every time I go up and they come back down, that's just fat. And then it comes back down, you lose some muscle again. And then up fat, and then lose muscle again. Before you know it, you're 30% fat, and you weigh 160 pounds.
Yeah, no, it's true. And muscle is really important. Yeah, man. So Mark, this is going to be a really interesting episode because you don't take pictures anymore. You're no longer a photographer, really. And you actually kind of reached out to me with this podcast idea, and I actually think it's going to be a really interesting one because it's something that comes up all of the time on the podcast in terms of people who have quit landscape photography. And I think you're a really interesting case in terms of talking about the how and why it all went the way it did. And so maybe for people who don't remember you or aren't familiar with you, maybe just a quick introduction of who you are and where you live now.
Okay, so back in 2018, I was living in San Diego. I'm now living in an area just south of Houston, Texas. We just got really sick of the government reaching into our pockets all the time in terms of taxation in California. It just became very unbearable. And so we decided to move to a state that didn't have a state income tax. Obviously, we still pay federal tax, but it was a consideration when they're taking 13.3% of your income.
Yeah, you automatically get a 13% raise.
Yeah, exactly. We moved, we got a raise. So it was fantastic. Before that, I was, of course, from 2011 to 2018, full-time landscape photography. Since 2018, I went back to my career. I went back to law, and I left law in 2024 and went to a private equity firm where I'm a vice president now. So the money's a lot better, but it's still a grind, right? We're all going to have to make money somehow. So I always figure, since we're all going to spend about the same amount of time making that money, might as well make the most amount of money while you're doing it. So going from law to private equity was a good way for me to do that. Also, I'm still using my legal training in private equity.
Yeah. Well, so Mark, you had what I would consider a very incredibly successful career in landscape photography. I mean, you were kind of living the dream of what I feel like most people aspire towards. You were selling high-end prints in your own gallery. You were traveling the world, taking amazing photographs. But then you made a life-changing decision to walk away from everything. Can you take us back to that time and share what ultimately led to you to step away from photography?
Yeah, if you go back to episode 44, you'll see that I was alluding to the fact that I wouldn't be doing this forever. I had been considering walking away from photography at that point, but I couldn't tell you that because that wasn't a for sure thing. But the more I became comfortable with the idea, the more palatable it sounded to me. So I decided to leave photography after I went to Italy in May of 2018. The reality, though, is that my son at the time was 6, getting ready to turn 7. And he recognized that I was leaving for 3 and 4 weeks at a time. South America, Europe, Asia, wherever you're at. And when you're in South America, for example, and you're in Patagonia for 3 weeks, it's really difficult to get a phone call into them. I'd go into town every 4 or 5 days and then make a phone call. Well, when you're 6 years old, that seems like months and months. And so whenever I would come home, you could tell he was very happy to see me. But also, when I was going to leave again, he would verbalize that he wishes I wasn't leaving. So he was starting to get to the age where he recognized that I was actually leaving for periods of time, which when he was 3, 4, 2, he didn't care, nor did he verbalize it. But it was just becoming more evident to me that he was considering my being gone and my leaving. And he appreciated me being home. So as you know, when you're out in the field for weeks and weeks and you're out mostly hiking, because you're mostly hiking to get your spots. Most of the time we're not shooting. Any landscape photographer who's listening to this right now and sees this, they understand that most of the time that we spend is getting to our locations. And you know this because you're always doing that now.
Yeah, for sure.
The actual amount of time we spend shooting is very small. And so you have a lot of time when you're out in the field to think about where it is you've been, where you are, and where you're going to go. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it might be time for me to stay home and not be out in the field for weeks at a time. And I was doing about 150,000 miles a year by plane. So that's quite a bit of flying. And I just came home and told my wife, I said, listen, I think that I'm just going to wrap it up here. And she had not mentioned ever, she never even planted the idea that I should consider not being a photographer. And so she at first said, well, why would you do that? You should continue to do what you're doing. And I explained to her how little Mark was and my thinking on it, and just told her that I think it was best at that point to make that decision. She of course co-signed it, but she had no problem if I would have just stayed out.
Interesting. So it's wild that you say all this, because I feel like for a lot of photographers, giving up photography would be like akin to cutting off like one of our arms or maybe 3 or 4 of our toes or something like that. And it's just such a deep integral part of who we are as human beings. So maybe take us back to like what originally invigorated you in terms of landscape photography, and how were you able to like cut those ties, and how difficult was it?
So initially I did what most people do when they start photography. I had a kit lens with a little, heck, I don't remember what Nikon it was, but it was some little basic entry-level camera. And I go out in the yard and shoot rocks and trees and just the little things that we do, shoot a car, whatever it was. And of course, that just gave me an appetite to explore more around the house and the yard and things like that. And eventually I started finding my way and found the things that I really love to shoot. But initially, it was just for the love of shooting. Eventually, though, it becomes a business. And when it becomes a business, it becomes a lot easier to literally walk away from something as well, because you've removed yourself from the earliest parts of your career. So when I was doing it really just for the love of it, that was years past. by the time I came to the conclusion that I was no longer going to do it, it was a business decision. It wasn't, oh my gosh, it's so romantic and I love doing this. It really wasn't like that anymore. It was really, it's a job. I have to grind. I have to go out, catch a plane. I have to go to Miami, sit there for 6 hours. I have to go to Santiago. Then I need to go down to the southern tip of South America. I have to take a bus back up. I have to get to my location. After I pitch my tent, I'm going to go scout out the area. It sounds tiring just talking about it. and so I just got to that point where it was time for me to go. And it was a business decision. It wasn't one of those things that was really difficult for me. It would have been a lot more difficult during the first 2 years of photography. But during the last 6 years, 6 and 7, it really wasn't that difficult.
Well, so I'm curious, you mentioned your wife never mentioned to you that you should stop. What was kind of the ultimate turning point for you?
I think it was the last time that I went to Canada, and I could see that there was a visceral reaction from my son about me leaving I think I was only out there for 2, maybe 3 weeks tops. We were in the Canadian Rockies, we were in Banff, we were in Jasper, and there was a lot of snow. We were there in the fall, but as you know, the snow season starts early in Canada. So it was nice where I lived in California, but it was actually getting kind of ugly in Canada at the time. And so we were snowed in for several days, and we were living in these little huts and just had a lot of downtime. And I started really considering it a lot more, especially in light of him making comments. Mm-hmm. By the time I got home, remember, we talked in I think early 2018. That podcast didn't get published for a couple of weeks at least.
Right.
So I had been home for about 2 or 3 months at that point, and I was very seriously considering going a different direction. And in the podcast itself, I said, I can't imagine doing this probably longer than 3 more years. I suspect I'll be done. But I was obviously contemplating it and thinking that I would be leaving sooner rather than later.
Yeah. It also occurs to me that, you have a law degree, you have a lot of things that you could fall back on in terms of a career that you could, okay, I'm done with photography, I can go do this other stuff. But I imagine for other people, making that fallback transition might not be as easy, especially if they've invested years and years and years of their life trying to grow their business. So maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of how much easier that decision was for you to make, given the fact that you had all of that available to you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, because I had, as you know, I was shooting with the Phase 1, and a Phase 1 is not inexpensive.
Right.
And despite the fact that I was actually sponsored by Digital Transitions, they don't give you free gear. Okay. So you still have to pay for your lenses, your gear, all that stuff. And that's a $60,000 investment. So I already had money. In 2013, when I bought my first Phase 1, I already had money. So it puts me in a different position, because I didn't have to make a ton of money in photography to do well in life. I had already had a career as a journalist. I was in law. I already had all these other ways of making money. What I feel like I did is, for about a 7-year period, it's almost like I took a break from corporate America, but I had enough money to do that. And I got lucky, and I was able to actually own a gallery in La Jolla and make money doing that. So it wouldn't be the same if I had started off younger and hadn't already built a career or two and didn't have all that money to fall back on. That would have made it a much more difficult situation. And if I was a good photographer and I was making money in the gallery world still, I probably would have thought long and hard about leaving in 2018. I probably would have cut back my schedule, but I don't think I probably would have left.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So going back to the passion of landscape photography, what do you miss most about being a landscape photographer?
I think it'll be ironic to people that I actually don't miss photography at all. I sold my gear as soon as I came home from that Italy trip in May of 2018. I immediately sold everything, because the way I am is either all in or all out, not halfway. So I had to sell everything to be done. So I sold all of my gear, and just at that point realized that there would be nothing beyond this. That would be the end of photography. I have shot one time since then for my brother. He wanted me to go to South Carolina to shoot a lighthouse and to shoot a bridge there. I wasn't even using my own gear. I was using, Kevin Holiday?
Yeah.
I was using his gear because he and I went.
Wow.
And I shot with his Nikon gear.
So it sounds to me like you don't really miss anything about the photography aspect.
I don't
of
miss
it.
anything about photography. I think the biggest thing I miss is hanging out with guys like you.
Right.
I talked to Eric Bennett the other night for about an hour, just catching up. I saw David Thompson in Las Vegas, hung out with him for about 4 hours. It's you guys that I miss, but I don't have to have a camera I could go out in the field right now with you guys and not even shoot. That would be perfectly fine with me. Just hanging out and reminiscing or talking about what we're doing in life or where we're going to be in the next 20 years, things like that. That's what I miss. I miss those things. I miss being in South America, going down a pathway and seeing Eric Bennett come out of nowhere, which I never expected to see him. I'm walking down this trail in Patagonia, and here comes Eric. And Eric hooks up with me, and he says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going here." "Where are you going?" "I'm going over there." I go, "Why don't you hang out with me for the next 2 weeks?" And we hung out for the next 2 weeks shooting. So it's all the time we spent together when we really weren't shooting a lot. Obviously, you go scouting, but when you're waiting for the light to be just right, all you're talking about is hopes, dreams, family, all that stuff. So
Right.
I miss all of that. That's what I miss. I don't miss photography.
The human connection side of it.
The human connection.
Yeah. So the flip side of that is, at least for me, because I often ask myself and other people, if you didn't own a camera and you weren't a photographer, how would that change your habits of appreciating nature, spending time in the outdoors? And for me, like I 100% know that I would still go hiking, I would still go backpacking, but the way that I would do it would look a little bit different. So I'd be curious if you talk a little bit about like, how do you miss some of that aspect of what photography does for you in terms of putting you into some pretty incredible places?
So I still travel and I still see the world through a compositional way. Even when I'm out in the street, say in Las Vegas, I'll see a scene and I can still compose it. So I feel like I'm still doing the composition part of the photography, which is what I always really did love. I love composing images. And I felt like I was really good at the compositional aspects of photography. It's what made my images look good because you compose them in a way that looks good to your audience. And so that's something that you never really lose. You constantly see the world through a composition. I'm looking out my window right now and I can see my backyard and I see that the chairs are kind of misaligned. And in my mind, I'm fixing them and things like that. So there are parts of photography that I'll probably never lose. And it's probably composition.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I'd be curious, what do you miss the least about being a landscape photographer?
The least is travel.
Uh-huh.
The least is the travel, getting to the most beautiful sites in the world. That's the glamorous part. That's the image that you see. But Los Angeles to Houston to Buenos Aires to Punta Arenas, in a van back to Chile, all that stuff, I don't miss that. I don't miss that at all. And that's probably the thing that I hate the most.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm actually, in March, I'm doing something very similar to that, flying down to Santiago and then, same thing, like all the way down.
Are you going down to Patagonia to shoot?
Actually going to sail the fjords.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But
you'll be in the area. You'll be in the neighborhood.
Yeah, but like the amount of time, I was looking at my itinerary, it's like, basically 2 full days each way, just travel. Like
it is. It is. It is. It is. Then you're going through customs. You have to deal with crossing the borders down there. It's just bad roads. There's a lot of dirt roads in Patagonia.
Right.
Flat tires are common. There's just a lot of downtime. And I loved getting to my site and lining up my shots. I just didn't enjoy getting there. Indeed, we'd have debates out in the field. Some of us would talk about what was so rewarding about the images we captured. And I would say, if I could just have a helicopter land, get my shot, get back in the helicopter and get back to site, to my campsite, I'd be perfectly happy. And there'd be other people who say, that's ridiculous. Part of the whole process is getting there, then capturing the image, and the image itself becomes more meaningful. For me, it wasn't like that, because the only person it has to be meaningful for is my audience, is for the end user who buys my image. They don't get to see all that stuff, so that's irrelevant. The only way they get that feedback is me putting a note out there saying, I hiked for 9 hours to get to this location. The sun was doing this when I got there. I have to really set up the scene for them to understand what went into capturing the moment.
Yeah, and hearing you talk, it occurs to me that at the moment that you quit, that photography for you was like you were photographing for your clients. You were photographing for the print to sell it to your audience versus, I'm guessing, at an earlier point in your photography journey, the photography was just about you and your relationship with these places and the experiences that you were having. At what point did that change for you?
That probably changed in 2014. I got my phase in 2013. I had to learn that camera. It took about 3 months before I felt like I had mastered my gear. And I went shooting in Canyonlands. And I think it was right around there that I felt like, oh, this is actually a business for me now. I sensed that I have to be out here. I have to be capturing my images. I need to make sure I get at least 25 images from this 2-week period. And it just became a lot more mechanical and a lot less just winging it out there and having fun with my friends.
And that sounds to me like it wasn't necessarily a conscious choice that you made. It was more just like kind of just organically went that direction. Because
yes,
for me, like I transitioned full time about 2 years ago now, and I've had to make very conscious choices to, like when I go on trips for myself, I have zero expectations that I need to capture any images. If I get one good photo a day, that's cool. If I get one good photo a month, that's cool. For me, it's more about the experience side of being out there, but I have to, like, that's intentional, right? For me. And because I don't want to end up like you.
Yeah,
No offense.
I think most people ultimately will end up like me, because if you do it full time and you're operating a gallery, especially, it is a business. And at the end of the day, you have to be thinking about your clients and about paying the rent and making sure that you can make your nut every month. So it becomes very businesslike and it becomes less romanticized.
Yeah. And I think, the path that you took, right? Like you have a gallery, so you have these fixed monthly costs that you have to pay.
Right.
That like kind of forces you into having that mindset. Whereas there's other photographers, I mean, thinking of like Eric Bennett or like Alex Noriega, like their income model is much, much, much different. Like they don't have any retail space. It's, it's driven largely by virtual transactions and,
tutorials and things like that.
Right.
They're selling their knowledge, and they're not out in the field freezing their asses off.
Right. Or in the gallery or whatever.
Or in the gallery, for example. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't go to the gallery that often because I was always out in the field, and my gallery director would handle all the in-house stuff. So I'd really just check in periodically, but I was rarely in the gallery.
Oh, that's good.
That was good.
Well, although we'll talk a little bit more later about how that maybe wasn't good, but
yeah, exactly. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I was curious. You talked a bit about the relationship with your son being a huge catalyst for your decision-making process. How has your relationship with your son changed since you left the photography business?
So when I left photography, he was in 3rd grade. He's now in 8th grade. I'm not going to say he was acting out because he's a good kid and he never really did do that, but he was not concentrating in school as much as he should have been. And he's now a straight A student, high honor roll every quarter. I think with having dad home, he gets the benefit of the 2-parent privilege again. Mm-hmm. I think before he was really being raised by a single parent.
Right.
And so I think that's where he benefits the most. And he's a great kid with direction with 2 parents. I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, to be fair, I mean, I feel like that you could say that about most kids, right? Like if they have the attention of their parents and the love of their parents and you're actually able to give them what they need, like it's probably going to have a better outcome.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I was raised by a single parent. Yeah. And I know what I was like as a kid. Directionless, did what I wanted. And I paid the price for that early on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look at you now, though. You're successful.
There was a lot of luck. There was a lot of luck involved with how people end up. There's lots of doors that open and close, and a lot of it's luck. A lot of it's the networking you do, but don't ever discount the fact that there was some luck involved. Just got to take advantage of it when it does come. You have to be prepared for it.
That's right. Yeah. Luck favors the prepared, as they
It
say.
does. It certainly
Yeah.
does. I have lots of stories.
Yeah. All right. Well, about your son a little bit more. I mean, you said that your son shared some thoughts with you about your career and your travel schedule. What did he say to you that stuck with you?
I don't want you to leave. I don't want you to go. And that was the first time he had ever said something like that. And even now,
that's
7
hard.
years later, when I'm going to go, say, to San Antonio for 1 day or 2 days, but when are you coming back? You can sense there's a little anxiety in his voice that he wants to make sure I'm not going to be gone for long periods of time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm friends with quite a few photographers who have a very rigorous travel schedule and they have young kids at home. And I personally don't know how they do it. I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest, I mean, my son, he's 17, he's super independent and we have a great relationship, but like, he doesn't care if I'm there or not, kind of a thing.
Yeah, he's at that age now. He's at that age now.
Right. And so like for me, making the decision to do this was a lot easier because of those circumstances, but I couldn't imagine making the choice to be gone voluntarily for 60 to 200 days a year if you have young kids at home. I just feel like that would be a very difficult thing to do to your family.
Very difficult. In fact, when I started photography, he was born. He was the impetus, as you may remember, of me picking up the camera for the very first time. Because my wife said someone had to take pictures of him. So pretty much from that moment on, from the day of birth until almost 8 years old, I was on the road.
Wow, that's really rough.
Very difficult. We knew a lot of NFL players because of where we lived in San Diego. They lived in our neighborhood. And we would talk to them because they're gone about 6 months out of the year. And there are a lot of divorces in the NFL for two reasons. One, you're gone a lot. And two, eventually you're going to retire. And then that's really where a lot of the divorces do occur after the money train has run out. The wife will pivot to something different. And she's not going to have the limelight on her anymore either. And so they go their own way. But the bottom line is they all told me the same thing. If you can help it, don't be out on the road as much as you are. But I really couldn't control that. I really needed to be out there about half the year.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I imagine that you have collected other stories about full-time photographers who have had challenges within their relationships and their marriages as well.
Yeah. Look, when you're out there, let's use me and Eric for example. Eric and I I've spent more time with Eric Bennett than any other photographer in my life. I have gone to Utah many times, stayed at his house. We use it as the base of operations, and then we go shooting for days, and then go back home and do all those things. And he and I have talked about other photographers and just how well they're doing, coping with their full-time careers. There are a lot of divorces. There are a lot of rocky marriages that do stay intact, but they're not the best marriages. And it's because you kind of have to, it seems to me that if you want to get really good at photography, you want to thrive as a business person in this business, generally, not specifically, generally, I think you have to spend quite a bit of time at home nurturing your relationships if you want them to do well. If you don't, you will end up in a very sour relationship that could end up in a divorce. And we know several people, I can think of probably a handful at least right off the top of my head, who got divorced while we were out while we're out there. They come home and they get served divorce papers.
I mean, you know, it's a joke in photography community in terms of like the camera is like your mistress. You know?
For sure. Absolutely. I think what I would tell your audience is this: just have great balance. Try to be as efficient as you possibly can and as judicious as you can be when you're out on the road. If you think you need to be there 3 weeks, maybe cut it back to 2. See if that works. If you think you have to be there 2, maybe cut it back to a week and a half. Try to minimize the amount of time that you really do need to be out there. I think we all think that we have to be out there for weeks and months, but I don't think so. I really don't think you have to be out there as long as we think we need to be out there. And you should, when you are home, make sure you're present. Because what I would
Right.
do is I come home after being in a place like South America where there's no noise, no cars, and then it take a week to decompress. I don't want to be around anybody. I don't want to hear anybody. I don't want to go on the freeway. So I wasn't always present, even when I got home. I was editing, and I have a family, and they expect me when I'm home to be present. And I wasn't even doing that. So I could see how it could be very difficult. So what I would say is, if you're going to be out on the road quite a bit, make sure when you come home, you try to be as present as you possibly can.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if anything, this is a cautionary tale for people who are considering making landscape photography a full-time profession, in terms of being willing to potentially sacrifice things that are very important to you in terms of relationships, or maybe if you don't have children yet, like maybe reconsider it, because it might not be the best decision to make if you're planning on being gone for months and months at a time. And find a partner who's incredibly supportive and flexible. I mean, that's where I'm lucky. My wife is like, you want to be gone 100 days a year? That's cool. I'm good.
Yeah, my wife was just like that. She didn't mind that either. In fact, I've probably gotten her hair more often than not, and she was thinking that was a little vacation for her.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's actually, for some couples, it's good to have that separation, because, the old adage, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. I think that can be true, but the opposite can also be true. Like, people start to forget about you and things like that. So luckily in our case, it's the former, not the latter.
Yeah, we've been married 25 years now. And 7 years ago, when I decided to leave photography, I really just came to the conclusion that first and foremost, I wanted to make sure I was present as a dad. But secondarily, and not far behind, was the fact that I was in love with my wife, and I wanted to make sure that I could be with her. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to get to 25 years and 50 years and die with her. And so for me, it really was not that difficult of a decision, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to take a quick pause and tell you about the tripod that I trust for my landscape photography, the FLM CP30 L4 II. Finding the perfect tripod is like finding the perfect pair of boots. It needs to be sturdy, reliable, and lightweight enough to carry all day without regret. That's why I use the FLM CP30 L4 II. This tripod strikes the perfect balance of height, weight, stability, simplicity, and price. It's rock solid in the field, yet compact enough for long hikes. And here's the kicker: it's half the price of tripods from Really Right Stuff, while matching them in every critical way. So, if you're tired of overpaying for a tripod and want something built for serious landscape photographers, check out FLM. I trust mine in the harshest of conditions, and I think you will too. Find out more by visiting the link in our show notes or by visiting flmusa.com. Okay, let's get back to this week's episode. All right, well, let's transition and talk a little bit more about the business side of things. Now that you're out of the industry, what are some of the things that you disliked about the photography business?
Let's talk about the gallery, inside the gallery first. So your gallery director is the one that interfaces with all the clients. Okay? He knows, in my case, his name was Jun, Jun. And he used to be, before he came to us, he was the gallery director for Aaron Feinberg.
Okay.
Aaron Feinberg.
Yeah.
And before that, he was Peter Lick's gallery director at Mandalay Bay. Okay? You have to default to some of his business decisions because he knows the business better than you do. Okay? So you may have an idea of what it is you're shooting, and he may say, that's got to be reshot. We can't sell that. The way you have that, you got to go back. You're going to have to go back. We're just going to have to not use that image this time. So you can see the conflict between artist and business.
Yeah.
So that is a tension that's very real. It's a different thing when you don't have a gallery director and you're shooting for your own gallery and you monitor your own gallery as well. You're interfacing with clients, you're doing your own printing, you're doing all that stuff. That's different because you can be both the artist and the business owner and not have to worry about conflict. But when you have a gallery director who you're deferring to for some business decisions, it can get a little tense, especially when you think you brought back a winning shot and he's like, nah, that isn't going to work. And here's why it doesn't work. It's not A, B, or C. It really needs to be D, E, and F. And so back you go to the field, and you may not be going back to that position or location for a year. So that's just an image that just has to be reshot. So there were those are some of the things. The other part was just we also had a few other artists in our gallery. So it wasn't just me. So we had some variety. And then you fight for gallery space. There's almost only so many walls you can put your images on. I think we had 80 images in our gallery. And we had some really prime locations. The moment you walk in, you see the big one. And you'd come home from, I don't know, Washington, and you've been gone for 2 weeks, and you come back and the image that was there, which was yours, is gone. And someone else's image has been put up, and you want to know what happened. Well, why is that? And then you have to have that explanation. And so I think it's the tension between the art, the artist, and the gallery director, and the business decisions that get made. I don't miss those things about the gallery inside. Outside the gallery, I don't miss all the competition, the stuff that happened with Peter Lick, for example. Peter was about 5 doors down from us, and then Jeff Mitchum was probably another 5 doors down from that. And then I can't remember the other guy's name. Mengelson? I think it was Mengelson.
Oh, Tom Mengelson?
Tom was down about 2 blocks. So we had a very competitive block. The stuff that happens behind the scenes to sabotage the businesses is unbelievable. Before we even opened our door in 2013, someone had left a negative Yelp review of our business. We're like, there's no way to even look in the gallery. We have paper on the window still. And that same person was touting all of Peter Lick's work. We're like, hey, we don't know if Peter made him come over here. We doubt it. But probably the gallery directors were probably saying, go poison the well for the new gallery that's going to be in there.
Right.
There was a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of backstabbing with professional photographers.
Yeah. And that still happens today. I mean, I'm not familiar with the gallery side of things, but more on like workshops and, just online personalities. There's definitely some of that backstabbing that happens, and relationships that get soured, and people that get angry at each other and things like that. And I try to stay clear of that stuff as much as I can, but also as the podcast guy, like everyone brings everything to me.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the one thing that people just don't seem to understand, especially since I've been in business now for a long time outside of photography, it's not a zero-sum game.
Right.
They make money every day in this country. New money's printed every day. There's so much money sloshing around. We can all sell images to the same collectors. And for some reason, they think that only a single collector will only collect a single person. That there's no room for a collector to have all 4 of our pieces of art in their room, in their house. And so you get this kind of behavior. And the same thing happens online. For example, the tutorial stuff. Someone may think, oh wait, Eric has this person. That means they're never going to come to me. Let me see if I can poison the well there. So it's the zero-sum attitude that I just can't abide by.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it doesn't make sense logically. And also, in my experience, you get so much more out of collaborating with people and lifting other people up. And I think people on the outside see that and they appreciate that, and they eventually will want to put their money there as well. So I think that approach just makes way more sense than trying to be negative and poisoning the well, I think. And also, how exhausting does that sound, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then the other part was sometimes I'd be out in the field with people who would know who I was, and I would kind of tangentially know who they were through Instagram, for example. And they weren't professionals, and I could sense some jealousy. They would see, let's say that there was some business being transacted while I was in a hotel, and they happened to be in my room. And they'll say, what was that all about? And I'll say, oh, this person just bought this image, and I had some issues that I had to resolve, blah, blah, blah. And then they see that image and they're thinking, you can see it in their eyes. They're like, that ain't that great of an image, or whatever the case may be. You can sense their jealousy. There was a lot of that out in the field. You would run into people who just didn't think so highly of you. And I'm not saying that they made it well known that they were jealous, but you could sense that they had their issues with you. I don't miss that.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's interesting too, because like in some ways it's not even jealousy, because it's like, it's just a recognition that in this field especially, the quality of the photography is not necessarily what is going to drive someone to have business, right? Like, you
Very
don't actually have
correct.
to be that good of a photographer to sell a lot of photography.
This is correct. This is correct. I think that's why so many photographers fail. There are some really amazing photographers that suck at operating businesses,
Oh yeah, for sure.
and they don't make it, despite the fact they're so good. They're so good at photography, but they can't make a living at it. Then there are others who are what I call marginal, and yet they're really good at marketing their material, and they
Right.
sell a boatload of it. To your
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely true. 100%. Yeah. And I'm
Well, it's
somewhere in
probably
the
more
middle.
important to be able to operate a business than it is to be a great photographer today. And with AI, now who knows what's going to go on?
Oh yeah, no doubt. And,
There's,
well,
there's a lot of shenanigans with AI.
oh yeah, we've covered that on previous episodes to death. Let's talk about the gallery a little bit more. I know that you experienced a significant loss in when your gallery director embezzled from you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us that story and what it taught you?
Yeah, I'm glad I get to finally tell that story.
Yeah.
So, the one thing you don't want to have happen is have your gallery director, who's your partner, embezzle from you and have it become public, because that makes people talk crap about you, and then it also makes clients think that the internal controls are very weak. And we just kept that buried, but we did sue him. We took him to state court. He fraudulently was doing this stuff. Obviously, it's theft as well, but filed a lawsuit in state court. He eventually left the business altogether, went back to Hawaii where he came from. The last I heard, he was doing construction. And I don't know if I can mention his name because I'm not sure that you'd want to actually have his name be known. But I think that what we do as photographers is a disservice when we don't actually out people who are criminals. And it protects other people, because I'd be worried that this guy could pop up again as a gallery director for somebody else and not understand what exactly they're getting themselves into. I would love to tell you who this person is.
I think go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So his name is June, and his last name is Makugai, Macugay. When he was at Peter Lick's gallery, so I did my due diligence as much as I could, but
Sure.
you can't go to Peter Lick's and say, why did he leave?
Right.
It was only afterward that I finally figured out he was stealing images from Peter's gallery.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
He had artwork all over his house from Peter's work. And I was like, oh, so how did you get all this work? And he said he win contests and things like that in-house. There were explanations, but without you actually corroborating with someone and them telling you that he was actually stealing, you wouldn't know that. And then with Aaron Feinberg, after the fact, I talked to Aaron, and Aaron said, yeah, we were about to fire him when you actually met up with him and you guys partnered up, because he wasn't selling as much as he said he would be selling. He made lots of promises, but he wasn't good at actually following through on those things. So we saw the same thing. And the way I caught him was he went on vacation. And that's one of the worst things you can do if you're a criminal, is leave your criminal enterprise unattended, because you can't control clients who walk in. You can't control the paper trails that exist behind the scenes. And additionally, I had access to everybody's email, so I could read over everybody's shoulders. So my wife called me. This is probably about 4 or 5 days into June's vacation. And she said, hey, a client came in and she was trying to get a status on an image, one of Lee's images. And I said, well, which one was it? And she goes, I don't know which image it is, but I couldn't find it in the system. I said, that's odd. So we started digging around, and I started looking through emails, and you could see that what he had done was he did a side deal. And we had a Bank of America merchant account that we swiped all the cards through. He had created a Square account. And if you go in the back of our gallery, swipe the card through Square, it would go into his own accounts, and we would never see it. Well, it became noticeable during the first 3 months of the year because sales had dipped severely based on historical data. So we're like, what the hell is going on, De La Hoya? Like, what? This seems so odd that we're just hitting this weird spot right now. And we eventually reached out to clients to figure out what they were promised, how much money he had collected, things like that. We ultimately made everybody whole. I went through all the emails. I called all the clients. I said that June had not fulfilled the order. Some of them were like 10 weeks behind.
Oh, wow.
That's not how we do business here in the United States. If you live here in the U.S., and we print an image, you'll have it in 4 weeks.
Right.
If you're international, you'll have it in 6 to 8 weeks. And 10 weeks, 12 weeks is way too long. I go, that was the first red flag. Secondly, I'm reading some of the emails. I can see he collected money from you, but you're not going to get the image. So we'll print that image, make sure you're made whole. And then some of the other artists weren't being paid because he was, of course, stealing their images as well, right? He'd sell them, and then he's not only stealing from me, but he's stealing from artists because they're not going to get their cut. So I found all of that out, and then I made them whole. So there was probably a good 3 or 4 months of just really unraveling everything and paying people back and making sure that, yeah, we're going to probably leave this business, but I'm going to make sure that when I do leave, I did it honestly, and no one will be able to say anything about me. And so we paid everybody back. All the artists got paid back. The only thing that was unknown is the things that you just didn't catch. There may have been other images that made it out the door and I just never saw it. But I think I probably caught 90% of it. Why he did it, I do not know. He was essentially brought in almost like a family member to our house. And when I confronted him, I said, I have one of two choices here. One, you can help sell every image off our gallery wall and wind down this business. Or two, I can call the San Diego Police Department and have them come pick you up. Which one would you like to do? So I recruited him to help sell all the images that were still in the gallery. These are now house copies. So you're not going to be able to sell them for full price. They got little scuffs on them. People put their nose on them, things like that. So instead of selling an image for, say, $7,000, maybe I sell them for $3,000. Mm-hmm. But we probably had about $150,000 worth of images sitting in the gallery. So we liquidated them. And then we sent him on his way. Just go off to wherever you're going. File a lawsuit. Serve him. He was at the time when we served him in Texas. We served him at his daughter's house. And so we caught him. But he should have never done it because ultimately you're going to get caught. I'm a former news reporter. I was an investigative reporter for years. And it just made no sense. And everybody who's ever heard that story always says the same thing. Why would he try that with you?
Right. Like the worst
do it with
possible.
someone else, but why would you do it to someone who's just naturally inquisitive? Eventually, you're going to get caught. We already knew something was going on because sales had dipped so much during the first quarter. So his time was numbered. He probably did it for 3 months, by the way. That's it. 3 months.
Wow. Okay. And well, that would put a damper on you wanting to continue the business as well, I suspect.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I didn't want to be the gallery director. He was getting fired. And I had been in that business for 2.5 years at that point, and I just did not want to be in the gallery. Abe, he works his gallery on top of shooting his images. So he comes home and he sells his stuff and whatnot. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be the guy that lived in the gallery and then took off, because then my wife would have to run the gallery when I was gone. It just wasn't tenable for me. And so I decided that I was just going to shut the business down. I had a lot of clients at that point. I decided that I would just change the business model. So that's when I went to one of one, when I started just creating one image. And I could send, like, I don't know, whatever size it was, a good enough size for you to be able to see it in your email and be the first one to come back to me and say, I want to buy that. And then give you 24 hours, you pay for it, I print it, there you go. I could do that because I had 400 clients. I could have done that in 2013, but I could do that in 2016.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
That's why I pivoted to that model.
Yeah. Well, thinking back on the business side of things, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently in your photography business?
Obviously, hindsight's 2020, and if I could have done it all over again, I would have somehow figured out that June was a bad fit for our gallery, and then just had a different person running the gallery. That would be the biggest thing, because otherwise I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it when I did come home and did get to interact with clients in the gallery or do releases and have parties and things like that. I enjoyed most of the gallery experience. I just didn't enjoy being stolen from, and I did not enjoy the tension that exists between artist and gallery director.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe if you had a different gallery director, it would have been a totally different experience for you.
Yeah, it probably would have. I have hundreds of images that I've never even edited to this day. I can sell for a long time still.
Yeah, if you wanted to.
Yeah, if I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious, how do you stay creatively fulfilled now that you've stepped away from photography?
So the one thing that I've done is gone out of my way to hang out with people, especially on the weekend. I'm a car guy, and I love driving my cars on the weekend. I don't drive them during the week, but I do drive them, and I'll rotate the cars. so that I can just get out there and drive my cars as fast as I want to drive. I drive early in the morning, so there's not that many cars out, and hang out with my friends on a Sunday, and then come back home. I'm refreshed and I'm ready to go Monday through Friday again. And it almost feels like Groundhog Day. Every week feels the same way, but I'm always fulfilled every weekend. I get to hang out with my friends, drive with them, go on drives, just catch up from the things that we had done the previous week. And so I'm doing that. As far as creative things, I'm not really doing a lot of creative things. I run every morning. I walk every morning. I lift weights in the morning. I probably spend 3 or 4 hours doing that. During the day, I'm doing all of my private equity things. And then in the evening, I'm really just unwinding and hanging out with the family.
That makes sense.
So there's not a whole lot of creativity going on these days.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounds to me like you experienced a great deal of it for a long period of time, and that fulfilled you, and now you're ready to transition to different things.
Yeah, and we also own a lot of real estate. One of the things that I did was I pivoted into commercial real estate. Before that, I was a stock investor, but we eventually started buying properties, hotels. We own a fairly large portfolio of properties now. And so we've got passive income. We've got properties that don't kick off a lot of cash, but at disposition, you get a good multiple from those properties. So let's say, for example, we have 6 hotels right here in Texas, and we're going to sell all of them together. You get a nice payday at the end of that when you've owned them for 3 or 4 years. So I guess I am kind of staying busy, even if I'm not that creative anymore when it comes to things like photography.
Right.
Or
Well,
painting.
I mean, running a business requires creativity as well.
Yeah, but I'm not running it. My brother and my nephew and brother-in-law are the founders of that firm, and I'm just a VP at this point. But I mean, it's still an important position, but I don't have to run it as much as they do. But yes, I do project managing and things like that. But I guess the one thing that I do enjoy is just knowing that I don't have any financial worries. That's the big thing I think we're all chasing is, it's my belief that most of us have a number. They think that they'd be super happy with a certain number, like maybe $8 million is your number. And let's say Eric, his favorite number is $2 million. What I've come to understand is that there's no number. It's actually not about a number. It's about having freedom from worry. You know when you made it, when you're no longer worried about money, when you're no longer worried about day-to-day bills. That's actually the freedom that we all seek, is the freedom from not having to worry about things. And that goes with everything you do. Freedom from not worrying about your marriage because you take such good care of it. Freedom from having the love of your children because it's reciprocal, because you love them as much as they love you. It's everything you do should be about the freedom that you have from that endeavor. So when it comes to the money now, I'm no longer worried about money. And that's why I'm probably in a much better place than I was 8 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, you don't have to necessarily make crazy amounts of money to reach that point. You just have to make different decisions about what your priorities are and how you want to live your life. It's very achievable to have that experience of not worrying with a very simple life if you're willing to do it.
Correct. And it's much easier for a single landscape photographer to be happy, in my opinion, because there's no one at home that they're disappointing. They're out on the road. They're doing their thing. You know, it doesn't cost that much money to travel. As much as people think it does, it doesn't. Because I knew plenty of people that traveled all over the world on a shoestring budget and had the best life. They were super happy. But money does not make you happy. That's the bottom line. Happiness is inside. It's what you are. Money merely amplifies what you are, or the lack of money amplifies what you are. Money is important in the sense that we need it in case we don't die tomorrow, but it's not the be-all, end-all that people think it is. And I'm just glad I've come to that conclusion, realization that it's not everything I thought it was going to be when I was younger, and now I've gotten to a certain level, and I used to think, oh, when I get here, I'm going to be super happy. No, I've actually been happy, poor, rich, and everything in between.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I got one last question for you, Mark.
Yes.
As you prepare to shut down your photography website.
Already did, by the way.
Oh, well, now that you've shut down your photography website, how do you want your time as a photographer to be remembered by other people?
So I don't know that anybody's going to remember me in photography, tell you the truth. Every now and then, maybe once or twice, maybe once or every other year, I'll go on Instagram and post just saying I'm still alive. And people will say things like, I really miss your photography and things like that. So there's clearly a group of people, maybe your audience, who will remember you a lot more than other photographers. So I think that's the first thing you come to terms with, is that most of your photographer people that you knew, they aren't really going to remember you for your photography. Instead, what they're going to remember you for are all the wonderful conversations and all the memories they have of you hiking with them and things like that. That just gets back to where we started, which is, what do I miss the most? All of you guys.
Yeah.
What do I miss the least? Photography.
The human connection piece.
Yeah, the human connection. I think the thing that I'd like to be remembered for would be not my photography, but how I was as a human while we were out there in the field.
Perfect. Well, Mark, this has been awesome.
It's been good catching up with you.
Yeah, thanks for telling your story, and hopefully other people will get some value out of what you had to share today.
Yeah, and by the way, I really miss you, pal.
Miss you guys too, yeah. I miss seeing all the crazy stuff that you're doing with the gallery, but it's great to hear that you're happy.
Yeah. If you ever want to come to my house, I'll take you on some fun rides.
That sounds good. Awesome. Thanks for joining me for another great episode. A huge thank you to Mark Handy for sharing his story with such honesty. It's not often we get to hear from someone who's been at the very top of the landscape photography world and then made the decision to walk away. His insights on family, business, and the realities of the photography industry are something I think we can all learn from. Before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to our latest Patreon supporters, Karen Hoagland and Chris Bailey. Your support helps to keep this podcast going, and I truly appreciate it. If you've been enjoying these conversations and want to help support the show, consider joining our Patreon community at patreon.com/fstopandlisten. Every contribution makes a huge difference, and it helps me continue bringing these deep, meaningful discussions to you every single week. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.